All right. So, social development, we define it as how students come to develop productive social skills and interpersonal relationships and internalize their society's standards for behavior. So, um, with this, both social and personal development are influenced by um, the individual's temperament, ability to control themselves, and their attachment. So, temperament is simply a general tendency to respond to and deal with events in particular ways. So some students have a more aggressive temperament, some are more timid, more extroverted, more introverted, more anxious, more relaxed, things like that. So effortful control is a general ability to inhibit immediate impulses in order to think and act productively. This is particularly important in education when learning a lot of things is hard and a lot of things students are not going to have an interest in. And on a certain level, that's okay, right? Nobody is interested in everything. However, um, you still need to learn things that you don't necessarily care about. And so that takes a greater level of effortful control than if your identity is, oh, I am a math person. It'll be easy for you to focus on math, but maybe you don't like English. And then it would take that same student a lot more effort to be focused and to be engaged in English class. Now, attachment is kind of the caregiver-child connection, and it influences personal and social development. So attachment, basically, if you have a healthy attachment, the child is more comfortable when the parent is not around, right? And that's because of how that connection works. There's trust that the caregiver will return, that the caregiver will be, kind and understanding. Whereas a more insecure attachment would be you know, at the kindergarten drop off, the kid is crying because their parent, leaves for the day. Now, that crying is fine and normal, but if it continues for more than a few minutes, that can be indicative of some attachment issues, and that will lead to additional challenges for the child and for the teacher. None of this is insurmountable, but it can be more challenging. With attachment, where there's not a clean connection between this, but parenting styles um, do influence things. So there's three primary styles here that we are focused on. One is authoritative parenting, authoritarian parenting, and permissive parenting. So, authoritative parenting is characterized by affection and respect for children with reasonable restrictions on behavior. So, in terms of research, this is fairly universally seen as the ideal. Um, However, authoritarian parenting um, is not always bad, right? So research has found that authoritarian parenting can be healthy in a sense when the environment is less than ideal, right? So if it is particularly dangerous, a parent just saying, no, you are not going outside, it's too late, without explanation and just demanding compliance can be quite helpful, is what research has found. So it's not a perfect, clear, this is good, this is bad. Um, there are kind of gradients of gray, shades of gray here. Permissive parenting, however, is not ideal. Basically, this gives the children a great deal of freedom with few consequences for inappropriate actions. Um, and this isn't ideal because kids, anyone really, but kids in particular, do need structure in order to help them identify and understand the world. And so, with the big five personality traits, this is linked to temperament, which we discussed earlier. A way to help remember it is the OCEAN acronym. So openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Um, and so these are just kind of how people are. Your students are going to be a massive mix of every possibility. And so what I want to spend a little time on is how you can adapt your classroom to diverse personalities. Um, Now, I'm using predictable several times here. So predictable does not mean boring, does not need to mean sameness. Okay. So I'll explain that in a moment. But basically, you do want to use a predictable variety of methods, so teacher-led, individual, small group, games, competitions, discussions, etc. Um, so you have kind of some standard processes or routines that you go through, and that lets students know what comes next. This will help students who are more anxious because there is a pattern. This will also help students who maybe have special needs, right? That predictability helps them know, it helps them adjust. Whereas if they don't know what's coming next, it can be more stressful. The other thing with this is like you don't want every single lesson to be the same. Um, and so part of this comes with the content you're teaching. Sometimes the content functionally it demands more discussion or demands more of a teacher-led approach, um, or requires, more small group activities, right? So for a simple example, if you're in shop class and you're trying to teach, building a bird box, a birdhouse, if you are only telling students what to do, then that's going to be very difficult for the students to succeed in building the bird box because you haven't necessarily given them chances to develop the skills to do it. You haven't um, allowed them to work together, and so it'll be um, lots of ranges of outcomes because of what you chose to do, right? If you are introducing something very abstract like meiosis or mitosis or photosynthesis. Um, Initially, that probably needs to be more teacher-led because it's very abstract and it's very complicated. Um, and so, with the content will determine somewhat about the methods, but also with lesson formats, some things require a different format. So in science, if you're doing a lab, that's a very different, um, requires a very different format than a standard lesson because what the students need to do is different. They have to make hypotheses, they have to set up an experiment, they have to know how to record things, then they have to analyze things differently than if they were in a standard class. In English, your lesson format will be different based on if you're reading a novel, doing a novel study, writing about the novel versus writing something like preparing for a standardized test or like a college entrance, a college application essay. The formats for all of those are different, but you can still have them be predictable. All right. The other thing that helps is clear rules, expectations, and enforcement for reasons where students have different temperaments. So if a student is more prone to outbursts, right, it's harder for them to have effortful control with certain emotions. Clear rules and fair enforcement and expectations are helpful for that. And you can teach self-control strategies in order to help students who um, maybe need a little extra assistance, a little extra structure, or whatever. Um, and with all of this, it's all kind of done in the context of you working to understand your students. Um, this is not a simple process. There's so much stuff going on. You're figuring everything out, you're adjusting to new context. And chances are you haven't interacted with that diverse of a group of people in a like a leadership context where you are teaching them, you have authority over them. Um, and so it's challenging because there's a lot of different cultures, there's a lot of different needs, and that all interacts differently. Um, the other thing I want to talk about in terms of temperament, and this will be the last thing, is that um, the other reason you should use a variety of methods is that the goal is not to cater to students, things students like. The goal is to help them learn, to help them develop personally and develop socially, right? So that means the very introverted student who would be very happy with a teacher-led and individual teacher-led classroom with some individual activities should be pushed to actively participate verbally in small group discussions and whole class discussions. The student who is very extroverted should be pushed to, you know, actively listen in teacher-led portions and to, be focused in individual activities. The hyper-competitive students, they should be pushed to, you know, actively, appropriately engage during teacher-led and individual um, portions of the lesson, right? So this isn't about catering to temperaments. It's about helping things become accessible to students of whatever temperament and whatever ability, and helping them develop from wherever they are to somewhere that's more advanced.